There's been a ton of negative sentiment and pessimism surrounding Redfall as of late, and while I generally like to keep my coverage of Arcane Studios and their games as positive as possible, I figured it's about time for me to chime in on the current discussion and share my thoughts on the matter. For those who haven't heard, news broke from the official Redfall Twitter account that the game would only have a quality mode on Xbox consoles at launch, meaning the maximum frame rate will only be 30 frames per second on both the Xbox Series X and S, and a 60 frames per second performance mode would be released at an undisclosed date after launch. As you might expect, this disappointing revelation drove the internet into a tizzy and reignited the pointless and utterly ridiculous console wars over whose favorite piece of plastic hardware from Sony or Microsoft is the best. However, the news also sparked a far more important point of contention in today's gaming landscape. Is 30 FPS acceptable for a first-person shooter in 2023? The short answer is no. This is absolutely unacceptable, and I agree with the large majority of people complaining about this, especially when Microsoft had talked such a big game ahead of the launch of the Xbox Series consoles. They flaunted that these consoles would run first-party exclusives at 60 frames per second bare minimum, and sometimes well above that to a maximum of 120 frames per second. They also bragged that they had the most powerful console on the market with the Xbox Series X specifically. Is it really so surprising then to see that everyone is upset by this news when Microsoft created these lofty expectations for their games in the first place? There are so many questions that this news has raised among the gaming community. Namely, why is Redfall only releasing with a quality mode at launch for the console version? Some have speculated that Microsoft is unwilling to delay one of their major first-party releases again right after announcing a second delay for Starfield, and they found that releasing Redfall in this state with the bad press attached to it would outweigh the potential backlash from another delay till later in the year. Others have guessed that perhaps due to the nature of Redfall being the largest game Arcane Studios has ever built in terms of both size and scope, that they ran into some previously unforeseen technical hurdles that meant they wouldn't be able to have a 60 FPS performance mode ready in time for launch day. Some have even suggested that Bethesda and Microsoft want this game to fail, which is patently false and just plain dumb, because why would you want your own commercial product to fail? This piece of considerably bad news is unfortunately only the latest in what seems to be a never-ending stream of toxicity and negativity centered on Redfall. Negativity that I feel has been justified in some areas while being completely overblown in other areas. Arcane Studios are facing a level of scrutiny and skepticism that they have never had to face until they became a part of the Xbox family when Microsoft completed their acquisition of ZeniMax Media and Bethesda a few years ago. Redfall is a game that you can just tell has had a ton of love and passion poured into it, much like all of Arcane Studios' prior work. Now though, it seems the game has become something of a guinea pig for Microsoft to play around with and learn from so that their other first-party games, namely Starfield, can benefit. Redfall is going to walk so that games like Starfield can run, if that makes sense. Now, like I mentioned before, there have been plenty of other what could be considered bad headlines surrounding Redfall that we also have to discuss. First was the quote from an interview conducted with Harvey Smith, the co-creative director on Redfall and studio director at Arcane Austin, during the recent hands-on gameplay event, where he mentioned that a PlayStation 5 version of Redfall had been initially planned and probably even began early development before Microsoft swooped in, acquired the studio, and halted the development of the PlayStation 5 version permanently. This quote has been used to show that Microsoft supposedly took games away from Sony and PlayStation, something they had publicly claimed they wouldn't do. What everyone fails to realize, though, is that Microsoft purchased ZeniMax Media and Bethesda for several billion dollars as part of a legally binding merger, and therefore were completely within their rights to have final authority on what consoles their games would be developed for and shipped to. Why on earth would Microsoft purchase Bethesda's entire library of IP only to continue to share that wealth with the likes of Sony? Yes, they honored the temporary exclusivity contracts for both Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo on PS5, and have continued ongoing support for Bethesda's existing titles on the PlayStation, like Fallout 76 and The Elder Scrolls Online, but there is no way they would ever share the upcoming suite of highly anticipated games like Starfield with everyone else. What makes this news more noteworthy, though, is the aforementioned 30 FPS debacle. Microsoft had stated that their first-party exclusives would take full advantage of the power of the next-gen Xbox consoles, and Harvey Smith stated that not developing Redfall for PS5 meant that they could focus more energy on optimizing for less platforms. But the news of the game running at 30 FPS on the Xbox Series X and S at launch really seems to contradict both of these statements. The second piece of bad news concerning Redfall was the revelation that the game would have an online-only requirement, meaning that if you are not connected to the internet, you will not be able to play Redfall offline, or at all for that matter. This news did not affect me as much because I'm lucky enough to be in a position where my internet connection is very good. However, I completely understand why so many are upset about this. Not everyone has access to a stellar internet connection, and not every part of the world has great internet providers. This was also a major blow to those calling for more industry-wide game preservation, as so many game publishers as of late have shut down online and server support for many of their titles, making them essentially shovelware and lost to time, existing only in cataloged YouTube videos. Thankfully, this news has been dampened a bit recently, as the developers at Arcane Austin said during the hands-on gameplay event that they were currently looking into removing the online-only requirement for Redfall, and while they couldn't make any guarantees as to when or even if they could deliver this workaround, the fact that they are taking the vocal feedback into account has been reassuring, to say the least. The final piece of negative coverage about Redfall is the now infamous IGN First gameplay video where, for 3 minutes, an IGN employee struggled to showcase or just straight up play Redfall proficiently in a way that made the game look appealing to the general audience. This video did the exact opposite. It made the game look much worse than it probably is, and further damaged public perception for Arcane Studios, Bethesda, and Xbox. The video turned so many people off to Redfall entirely and provided even more unnecessary ammunition to the console warriors arguing with each other. It also reignited discussion around the overall validity of games journalism and reinforced this stigma that games journalists have no idea how to play games, and therefore have no leg to stand on when it comes to critical reviews and general game coverage. You can watch the video for yourself if you haven't already, and see how blatantly terrible the footage is. And if I was in Bethesda's marketing and PR department, I'd be putting some serious consideration into never providing coverage like this to a games media outlet again. I've spoken plenty about the negativity and sensational headlines surrounding Redfall, but what I haven't yet discussed is the most important point I want to make with this video, and that is the human cost of all this constant pessimism. Arcane Austin is a studio that is filled to the brim with immensely talented people who have delivered some exceptional games to us over the years. Redfall is clearly a project that they're passionate about, and the team has spoken at length about many of the challenges they faced during development. So the fact that it continues to be dragged through the mud has to be demoralizing for the team. I know there's probably even a handful of folks on the dev team who watch my videos, and to them them, I just want to say, please don't let this barrage of bad energy drag you down. Keep your heads held high and know that you have an incredibly passionate fan base that cares deeply about the worlds you create. And it goes without saying, obviously, that I include myself among that fan base. Redfall is bound to be another very special game from one of the most talented AAA studios in the entire industry, and we, the gaming community at large, should give it a fair shake, despite what the headlines might make you think. Yes, there are some things to be concerned about, but we also need to keep ourselves level-headed and not feed into the negative sensationalism surrounding the game. Let's all just try to be a bit more optimistic and open-minded, not just as gamers, but as human beings. This is my call to action for the gaming community, and I know it sounds preachy, but I genuinely want the best outcome possible for Redfall and Arcane Studios, and my sincerest hope is that come May 2nd, many minds will be changed. So with all of that hand-waving and white knighting out of the way, these are just my generalized thoughts on the recent news concerning Redfall, but now, and far more importantly, I want to know what you think in the comments down below. Are you excited to play Redfall even after seeing all of the negative coverage, or has it turned you off to the game entirely? Do you agree that we should all be a little nicer in general as part of the larger gaming community? Who is to blame for the 30 frames per second debacle? Comment down below or join my official Discord server and let's have a civil and constructive discussion. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and share the video with other members of the Bethesda and Arcane Outsiders community. It really helps the channel to grow and get noticed. Consider subscribing to the channel for even more Redfall content in the future, and be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember that the outsider walks among us. Thanks for watching, everyone.